Nobody tells you that Italy hits you before you even leave the airport. I don't mean that in a poetic way. I mean, a man in a very small car nearly drove over my foot in the pickup lane outside arrivals in Rome, then waved at me like we were old friends and sped away into the traffic without a single sign of guilt. That was my introduction to this country. And honestly, looking back now, it was the most accurate introduction possible. Italy doesn't ease you in. It just starts. I had romanticized this place for years. Cobblestone streets, slow mornings, espresso in tiny cups, golden light falling on ancient buildings, the smell of fresh bread coming from somewhere you can never quite locate. All of that is real, by the way. Every single part of it is true. But what nobody puts in the travel photos is the noise, the heat, the traffic that follows its own secret rules, and the absolute unshakable confidence of every Italian person you meet. Rome is not a quiet city. It is alive in a way that feels almost aggressive at first, like the city itself is grabbing you by the shoulders and refusing to let go until you pay full attention, which, eventually, you do. My first morning, I did what every tourist does and went straight to the Colosseum. The line was long. The sun was already strong at 9 in the morning, and the man selling selfie sticks beside me was doing genuinely impressive business. But when I finally walked inside and stood in the middle of that ancient arena and looked up at those walls that have been standing for 2,000 years, everything else went quiet. Not literally, there were hundreds of people around me, cameras clicking, children running, tour guides speaking 6 different languages at the same time. But inside my head, something settled. That particular feeling of standing somewhere that has absorbed so much human history that your own life suddenly feels very small and also somehow very precious at the same time. I stayed much longer than I planned. I sat on a stone step near the back and just looked at it for a while, which is something I don't usually let myself do. Usually, I take a photo and move on. This time, I just sat. Then, I made my first mistake, as every first-time visitor to Rome eventually does. I saw a cafe near the Colosseum with outdoor seating and a nice view, and I sat down without checking anything first. I ordered a coffee and a small sandwich. The coffee was fine. The sandwich was fine. The bill arrived, and it was 14 euros for those 2 things, plus a glass of water I didn't ask for, but had apparently ordered by the act of sitting near a table in a tourist area. I paid it, left, and made a firm promise to myself to never again eat anywhere with a laminated menu and photographs of the food. That one decision completely changed the rest of my trip in the best possible way. Because the real food in Rome is never near the famous things. It's 1 street behind or 2 streets over, at the end of a narrow alley where there's no sign outside and no English menu, and 3 older men are sitting at a corner table who look like they have been sitting at that exact corner table every day for 40 years. I found one of those places completely by accident on my second evening, wandering without any plan through a neighborhood called Trastevere, stomach growling, getting quietly lost between identical-looking streets in the most pleasant way. A woman standing outside a doorway noticed me hovering uncertainly on the pavement and simply pointed at the door behind her. Inside there were maybe 10 tables, a handwritten menu on a chalkboard, and a smell coming from the kitchen that made every other smell I had encountered that week seem suddenly less important. I had pasta that night. Cacio e pepe, just pasta, pecorino cheese, and black pepper. That is the entire dish. It sounds almost insultingly simple for a country with this kind of food reputation, but the first bite made me understand immediately why Romans have been eating it for generations and see no reason to change anything. It was perfect in a way that felt almost unreasonable. The owner, a broad man with large hands and a short temper with the kitchen, but a genuinely warm smile for everyone sitting at his tables, brought me a small glass of something amber-colored after the meal, without being asked, and without charging for it. He said something in rapid Italian. I understood absolutely nothing. I nodded with what I hoped looked like confidence, and I drank it. Whatever it was, it tasted like exactly the right ending to exactly the right meal. Rome kept doing that to me. Every single time I thought I understood how it worked, it found a new way to surprise me. One afternoon, I turned a corner on my way to find a pharmacy, and suddenly, the Pantheon was just there. No warning signs, no dramatic approach, no build-up. Just an enormous ancient building sitting in the middle of a completely normal piazza, as if it had always been there, which of course it had, for about 2,000 years. People were eating gelato outside it. A group of teenagers were sitting on the steps. A small dog was sleeping in the shade near the entrance. 2 millennia of history, and the neighborhood just continues around it like it's the most normal thing in the world. I suppose when you grow up next to something that old, eventually it just becomes the building near your house. I took the train to Florence on day 4 and arrived to find a city that felt like Rome's quieter, more thoughtful sibling. Smaller streets, slower pace, easier to navigate on foot, and a completely different atmosphere, less chaotic energy, more quiet confidence. The Arno River runs straight through the middle of the city, and the old bridge crossing it, the Ponte Vecchio, is lined entirely with small jewelry shops that have been there since the 16th century. I walked across it twice just because it felt strange and wonderful that something so old was still being used for something so ordinary as shopping. The Uffizi Gallery took 3 hours and left me feeling like my brain had reached its maximum capacity for beauty in a single afternoon. There is genuinely a limit to how much a person can absorb paintings, sculptures, ceilings covered in detail, room after room after room, and I found mine somewhere between the Botticellas and the Leonardos. I walked out into the afternoon sunshine, feeling slightly dazed, and went immediately to find coffee, which helped. What I loved most about Florence had nothing to do with the famous things. It was the streets away from the museums and the tour groups. A leather workshop where the smell reaches you from half a block away, and a craftsman inside is doing something by hand that takes years to learn. A bookshop so old and narrow and dusty that stepping inside feels like entering a completely different century. A covered market where the stalls overflow with local cheese and cured meats and fresh vegetables, and where a vendor tried to explain to me, in passionate Italian with absolutely no English, exactly why a particular wheel of cheese from this specific region was superior to every other cheese that had ever existed anywhere on earth. I didn't understand a single word, but I understood the energy perfectly. I bought the cheese. She was completely right. On my 6th day, I did something unplanned, which turned out to be the best decision of the whole trip. A man I had been talking to at my hostel, Italian himself, from Naples, spending 2 weeks traveling through his own country for the first time in several years, suggested renting a small car and driving out into the Tuscan countryside for the day. I agreed before he finished the suggestion. We drove out of Florence on a small road heading south, and within 30 minutes the city had completely disappeared, and there was nothing around us except green hills rolling in every direction. Long rows of cypress trees standing like thin, dark lines along the ridges, old farmhouses sitting on distant slopes, and a sky so blue and so wide that it almost felt theatrical. We stopped in a village so small it barely registered on the map. One cafe, one church, a handful of stone houses, and perhaps 15 people who all appeared to know each other's complete life histories. We sat outside that cafe for almost 2 hours. We ordered wine because it was past noon and we were in Tuscany, and ordering anything else would have felt wrong. The owner brought out bread and some local cured meat without us asking. Just carried it out and set it on the table and walked back inside without a word, as if this was simply what you did for people sitting at your tables in the afternoon. My companion from Naples talked about his grandmother's Sunday cooking, which, according to him, took all morning and involved arguments and incredible smells, and the whole family crowded into a kitchen that was too small for everyone but somehow worked anyway. I told him about convenience store rice balls in Japan, and he looked at me with an expression of such deep concern for my well-being that I actually laughed out loud. The afternoon light shifted slowly from bright white to something softer and more golden. The hills in the distance changed color as the sun moved green to amber to something almost pink at the edges. A cat appeared from somewhere with no explanation, sat down next to our table, and stayed for the rest of the afternoon. Nobody came to rush us. Nobody needed the table. Time in that little village seemed to move at a completely different speed than everywhere else, and after days of walking and museums and navigating and decisions, sitting still in that golden, slow afternoon felt like the most luxurious thing I had done in years. My last evening brought me back to Rome, walking along the Tiber River as the sun dropped behind the buildings and the water turned orange, and then deep pink, and then a color that doesn't really have a simple name. The old buildings on both sides glowed in that famous late Roman light that makes everything look like it belongs inside a painting. A man was playing guitar somewhere nearby. I could hear it clearly, but never found exactly where it was coming from, the sound just drifting across the water from some invisible direction. I had a gelato, pistachio, because that is objectively the correct choice in Italy, and arguing about it wastes everybody's time. And I walked with nowhere specific to go and nothing specific I needed to do. Italy didn't go the way I had imagined it would before I arrived. It was louder and messier and more chaotic than the photographs suggested, more expensive in the obvious tourist places, and surprisingly affordable the moment you stepped one street away from them. People talked with their hands as much as their words. Drivers treated red lights as a gentle opening suggestion rather than an instruction. The coffee was always good, always small, always finished in about 45 seconds, standing at a bar counter, because sitting down costs extra. And Italians find the idea of slowly sipping coffee while seated slightly baffling. And somewhere between the overpriced sandwich near the Colosseum and the unhurried wine in a village with no tourists and one very confident cat, I stopped trying to experience Italy the way I thought I was supposed to and just let it happen around me instead.